it a little differently here, but once this is an image, this should be on for YouTube. Oh, it's okay. Is it going to find anything for you?
The first time.
So this is live.
They gave her a car, they gave her a kitchen. Nowadays, it's
And they involved for a long period of
trying to
time.
write the contract stronger, in terms of improving. They, part of Leah never got much approval. Because, she wasn't cheap.
So anyway, so you agree with the offer?
I know. It's either that. Once that camera or how to get this thing to do.
Retaliation will come up and actually just I'm just trying to make sure I understand this correctly when it comes to
That's true. I understand that there are boundaries.
So I started figuring out since there's many because of that, the reason they passed the 6th grade
The numbers are all
the 6th graders were elected to 40 different language and effectively and efficiently, then we're not going to, the other piece of this has to be there. The other one is how you acquire your data, that's the content. But being able to many people have high potential, including the parents of this particular case. The practice is hundreds of first of all, require all school districts and nonprofits like this require what type of people they're placing. I can't quite go to the place and concept like my question to the organization, would you say that there's great sentiment to continue websites like the successful statute 16? The fact is, when I can find another agency, nonprofit, because when I go and look at the ones that are which ones didn't give them a rating, but they don't include accessibility. Yet state agencies are part of it. So, you know what? I don't see any earnestness. Seriously. We can't rank the department and push it. I push on the department. Like I get surprised that there wasn't. I went to the best practice agency. Seven of them. Have you heard about this DVD called Payment for Achievement? No. So obviously, you get that in your own Bristol election. It was created in Minnesota in 2010. Guess what? Yeah, did you know how closely they're linked to the line? So guess what I'm going to create with that? Chapter 13. I'm going to get So I got to do a little digging. They got to do a little digging to figure out. I'd like to know how to word the question. It does be short, but it's got all the listeners.
Oh, God, no.
Because
9
you don't have,
seconds.
I have the radio phone. That radio frequency is given to the local congregation. I have a radio. Ever. Forever. Yeah. But it specifically says every hour on the hour. This radio station is specifically so when I talked to the director
Very nice to see you.
Well, no, and she made a prediction. There's no budget. That's the thing. This is where you can get.
Good morning.
You could bring the.
Good morning. I'm a fairly harsh taskmaster when it comes to time. So the promises I make are two. One, we begin and end on time, so you will be out of here by 11 unless you'd like to stay and chat, which is great. And the second is that you will learn something by 11 o'clock that you don't know now. So those are the two promises I've made. Now, before I really get started, I'm so excited to make an announcement. For years, what we've been trying to do at Parents United is expand enough so that we could bring into our organization an actual executive director who is focused on membership and the organization and where we're headed. And we have succeeded. And because of that, I can focus where I need to focus, which is in policy. So I'd like to introduce you to the new policy director for Parents United, Mary Saccone, and the new executive director for Parents United, Laura Lovedahl.
Thanks, Mary. Good morning, everyone. We are absolutely thrilled with the turnout this morning. We are delighted that the roads are cooperating with us and it's not the 2-hour commute that several of us had the other night. I think that you're in for a very enjoyable morning today, and I look forward to having an opportunity to get to know each of you as we start our journey in working for public education and helping to make sure that our children have the best access to learning that they can have. So enjoy your morning.
Thank you. The second thing that I want to say is that we have 65 registered people here, and we're live streaming to 9 sites. So because of that, I'm extremely trapped into this box here, which is going to kill me because I'm used to walking into the audience, so forgive me for not being better at being next to you. But I do need to stay here because of the camera. We also have the capacity for them to call questions. So what we are going to do is we are going to first ask you to put your phones on silence so that we don't interrupt the live streaming. And the second thing is I'm going to stop at intervals in the presentation for questions. And when those questions arise, if you could be brief, because the camera can't move off me, which is sad, but we will give you a microphone, but if you ask on the microphone, then we'll be able to answer it this way. So if we can do that, I think we can possibly keep the people from the 9 different sites engaged in what's happening in this room. And I want to welcome the people from the 9 different sites that are around Minnesota. I also want to introduce to you 2 of our staff members who are going to be fellows at the legislature this year, tracking legislation. Another part of our expansion was to try and get more people at the legislature so that we could track better and monitor better. So we now have 2 of our staff that will be tracking the House, and that is Ann Hobby, who's now tracking coffee, and Shauna Headland, right here, who will be helping with the webcam. So you will see them at the Capitol if you are there. You'll also hear from them in the updates. They will also be adding into any of the conversation here today and in the future. So with all those things in mind and everybody's ready to go, I would like to talk a little bit about Parents United, just to keep this in mind, that Parents United is the only, and I mean the only, oh, excuse me. Did you guys want to see all about my computer? The only Minnesota-born, parent-led organization that exists to unite those who value public education and help them become strong advocates for excellence in our public schools. We're very proud of this. We get a lot of calls from other states asking us how we do it. We get a lot of calls from other states saying, how do people start this kind of an organization? And we're proud that we're in our 12th year, 13th year of doing this. So, we also believe that it's very important that you know the agenda of anyone that you're listening to. Our agenda is pretty simple. We don't speak for parents. We're always asked to speak for parents. We don't. But we work to provide the credible, timely information to you so that about policy and the lawmaking process so that you can speak for yourself. That is the point. That is what we do. That is everything we think about each day. Truth be told, Parents United is a translator of complex education issues, and as well as we help you navigate the system. That's what we do. So people who come to us and say, well, what should I think about this bill or that bill? We will help you with all the information. We'll show you the pros and cons. We'll talk about why we see it as significant, but we will not say support it or make sure you oppose it. We have a great faith in the population that they can understand and they can make up their own minds. But what we have found is people then don't know what to do with that information. That's what we're here for. That's our nexus. So we have the election has brought us a different house. What do those election results mean? Well, first and foremost, everybody talks about divided government. All right, simply put, the House is Republican, the Senate is still held by the Democrats, and we have a governor who's a Democrat. Simple. Divided government sounds so aggressive. Actually, there are many good things that come from divided government. And what does concern me is during the election and directly after the election and then actually into the session, what we're hearing is a much deeper divide again between Metro and Greater Minnesota. In fact, the first bills that have come out of the gate are there specifically trying to drive a divide. That concerns me. We saw that several years ago, and what started happening for schools was there was all of this conversation about all the money going to the urban area, and there was no money out in Greater Minnesota. So the idea, the solution, was to take the money from the urban area and put it back out in Greater Minnesota. This divide cannot exist. Actually, that's how Parents United started, because that divide doesn't work. Our kids may be raised in Frazee, but chances are they may work in the metro area and then they may go back to Grand Rapids. We cannot be in a position to divide our state. This concerns me, and I think we have to make sure that people understand it's not the right way to go. One thing that we used to do, and we'll probably be bringing it back, is we would send into a legislator who's using this kind of divided language a parent from a rural area, a parent from a suburban area, and a parent from an urban area. And when the legislator tried to say, well, the problem is here, the three parents would say, that's not our view. So that's the kind of thing we would like you to hold in your head. This is a concern of mine. The other concern I have is, boy, this certainly began the 2016 election already. I mean, right out of the gate. And Senator Carlson is here. Jim Carlson just walked in. And Jim's already had negative ads put towards him. He doesn't run again until 2016. So these are already out. And so that concerns me as well. So, because where's the governing? We have 2 years that we need to govern, not run an election. The overarching issue of 2015, each session has an overarching issue. And this one, very simply, is a $40 billion budget. It has to be balanced. That's what everything's going to be about. The conversation's going to be about this. How you get there, how you balance it. So keep that in mind. Anything you may be advocating for, make sure you can advocate it in a balanced budget. We have heard a lot about this $1 billion surplus, but I think it's very interesting to find out what brought us this $1 billion surplus. Because if we were, say, a state that discovered oil, and that's what brought us the $1 billion, that would mean one thing. But in our state, the thing that brought us a $1 billion surplus was revenues higher than expected. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But that's a little bit of a surprise to some. But healthcare costs lower than expected. That's significant. The question is that trend going to continue? Because if that trend continues, that puts us on a better road. And then lastly, which I really am supportive of, is the unemployment rate being 3.7. That's the lowest rate since '06. That's significant, because if we can sustain that, or even make sure actually this is the lowest that economists like it to go, this puts us in a great position to continue with a balanced state budget. So of the things that brought us the $1 billion budget surplus, this is something to keep in mind. We didn't discover oil. We didn't all of a sudden tax one particular component for a lot. We actually have been growing the economy. Let's understand the surplus, though. Sometimes we forget about this, and it's really important that first off, in the early 2000s, a deal was struck between everyone who was running for governor and the legislature. It was simple as that. They didn't have, the numbers were a little bleak for the budget, so they decided how could they make it look less bleak. So the first thing they did is they factored inflation when they figured the revenues coming in the door. So this year you got $1. Next year, certainly that will be inflated to $1.05. So when we hear revenue projections, inflation is factored in. However, inflation is not factored in on expenditures. So the way to keep this in mind is, assume you're getting a raise. Everything's great. You're going to have a surplus. But you also then have to assume that not one service or product that you purchase in the coming year will cost another penny. That's the way the state operates. So when you hear projections, remember that inflation is only factored on the money coming in, not on the expenditure going out. So the question really remains, do we have an actual surplus? Jim Showalter, the now retired commissioner, said that we need $900 million this biennium just to meet inflation. So as I see it, that means we have $100 million, or what would be called a balanced budget. So that's an important component. So when people are running around saying, well, we've got $1 billion, let's buy this, or let's buy this, or let's buy the other thing. First off, remember how we got the $1 billion, by some pretty specific areas working on unemployment rates. And secondly, if we actually became truthful with our inflation, we would be looking at a cleaner budget. So leadership is really important in the legislature. It's huge. It means everything. The Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader in the Senate, the governor, and the 2 minority leaders, those 5, at the end of session, they are the big 5. The deals are struck. They are the ones who make decisions. Leadership also decides on the targets, how much each area of the government can spend, how much to education, how much to transportation, how much to health and human services. And committees wait until they get those target numbers. So who's in leadership matters. And remember what I said about the deeper divide in between Greater Minnesota and the Metro? Take a look at the leadership. First off, Senator Bach continues his leadership of the Senate because they didn't have an election this year. So, and he's from Cook. And they have selected and continued. Senator Chuck Uyghur is the education chair. And he's from North St. Paul. Both of these gentlemen sat in these same positions last year. New to the process is Speaker of the House, Kurt Doubt. He's from Crown, Minnesota. So your 2 biggies are from Greater Minnesota. The difference last year, Paul Thiessen was from the metro area, Tom Bach was from Greater Minnesota. We now have 2 leaders from Greater Minnesota. It's just important information to know. I'm not saying this is bad, I'm not saying it's good, but it is significant. We also have a Representative Jennifer Loon, who's taking over education finance. This is her first chairpersonship, and she's from Eden Prairie. And then Representative Sandra Erickson is taking over education policy. Representative Erickson has been in this position before. 2 years ago, this was her chairpersonship. She's a former teacher, and she's been around for a while. So Kurt Doubt is the youngest Speaker of the House we've had as far as the most inexperienced. He hasn't been there. He was only first elected in 2010. Another significant factor is that the House has changed the name of their policy committee from Education Policy to Education Innovation Policy. I can never get that straight. Maybe by the end of the biennium I'll get it. So, and there is no Early Childhood Committee. And then the Senate has reduced their education committees. There used to be a finance and a policy. This year, there's only education, 1 committee. So those are changes that we're going to see how that works. The first education bills out the door are important because it gives you a flavor of where people are moving. And the usually House File, Senate File 1, 2, and 3 are done from that leadership to really say these are the things that we're going to go to the mat for. So let's see what those are. Interestingly enough, both in the House and the Senate, they're floating bills for universal voluntary 4-year-old preschool. This is a response to the early childhood. It doesn't take the place of scholarships, but this is something that both the House and the Senate have put bills in for. The other is an interesting one. This is from 2 legislators from Greater Minnesota, which is full funding for K-12 transportation. That may not seem like a lot, but the transportation budget, there used to be $300 per student set aside for transportation, and that $300 was changed each year. They would kind of figure out how much it really cost and then make sure that districts had not lost from that. But truthfully, in 1993, they just rolled that on top of the per pupil formula, and it's been at that number since 1993. Now, I'm going to suggest that transportation costs have increased, and there are districts in Greater Minnesota the size of Rhode Island. Districts the size of Rhode Island. So the idea that full coverage or full transportation, that's a pretty interesting, it's the first time I've seen it, since 93 actually. This one's good. It's also coming from the federal level, but Minnesota jumped into this. I heard about it first through Minnesota and then at the feds. The idea of 2-year college tuition. Now, I will admit a bias here. Since, I don't know, forever, I've always wished that we had a P14 system. a way to actually bring kids along until they've got a position where they have some level of certification or something. And so this is interesting. I would watch this one because the funding of this could be very expensive, but I think there might be ways to do this. But the idea is everyone has been saying for a long time, high school is not enough. We've got to find ways for kids to get some kind of certification. We push to, we're trying to move to dual credit courses, which are essential for kids, especially kids who have never thought they were college material. We have PSEO, we have college in the schools. So this is an extension of this type of thing. You'll see several extensions in these bills. There was a facilities task force for the last 2 years that talked about how really the school facilities in Minnesota are really in dire need. They're in dire need. There's no money for just maintenance of them. So the facilities committee came up with a laundry list of recommendations of ways that they could increase funding for facilities. That would be capital. So this is a bill dropped to kind of help with some of that. This is the other one I wanted to tell you. This is in higher ed, but grants to industries that will provide apprenticeships for students. Now, that's very interesting because the idea of apprenticeships and internships started 2 years ago, and there's been a big roll on this, but this is the first time I've seen something kind of say, well, let's come up with some way to fund it and to support industries who will do this. So as a student, you could be taking dual credit, you could be taking college in the schools, you could be taking apprenticeship in an industry that you like, and potentially then we have a 2-year tuition for you so that you could move into a MINSCU system. That was nice. Technology funding. This comes in several ways. Technology funding is always there. Capital dollars can be used for technology, but technology funding, you hear about it all the time. There's several different ways that people have suggested doing this. One is using the trust lands. Several years ago, as the federal government granted to every state lands, I think it's the first and the 16th quadrant of every county. The money from those lands was to be used for schools. Several years ago, the House and the Senate passed legislation because K-12 used to get the money. It's about $30 a student, but then it was subtracted from the per pupil formula. So it was a net wash. A couple of years ago, what happened is they said, no, can't do that. You have to give the 30 and keep it there. And now there's movement to get a land grant, a manager of those lands to see if we can get more money for the schools out of that. You can imagine the fight then between, the managers of land to get money for K-12 and the DNR. So that's what's kind of stopped. That's the rub there. But that's one of the ways that they're saying, let's get money for technology. Let's dedicate those dollars to technology. Another, and this is a big one, and it is true, equity in telecommunications. Having dollars for access to telecommunications, can we find a way to make that equal across the state? There's obviously in policy, now we're seeing modifications of unrequested leave of absence provisions. We knew this was going to happen. It's no shock to anyone. Alternative teacher licensure, and increasing the compulsory attendance age. This is interesting because, what I find interesting, in Minnesota, the compulsory age starts at 7. Many states are 6, many states are 5. But with all our push towards early childhood, with all our push to all-day K, it's still interesting that we're still saying 7 years old. And this does nothing to change the 7-year-old. It moves it to 18. So it used to be 7 to 16. Then last session, Senator Uyghur and their committee got it from 7 to 17. And this year, Carlos Mariani is trying to get it from 7 to 18. Just those of you who may have young children, if you put your child in all-day kindergarten, they are considered now school age. You can't start them and then at the end of the first year say, we're going to take a year off. Okay, so at the Capitol, what's happening here? Well, the governor has unearthed 2 areas that he's most interested in, and he's talking about transportation and education. The transportation is going to be the huge talk of the session, no question about it. He went to the Chamber of Commerce and asked them to support $6 billion in increase for transportation. The rub there is, does it go to roads and bridges or does it go to mass transit? That has always been the rub, and that's more of that Metro Greater Minnesota. So people are pretty conciliatory now, knowing that we need to increase and improve transportation. The problem seems to be in where does the money go? Plus, where does the money come from? People are talking about gas taxes. Senator Bach Thursday said not interested in a gas tax. And remember the importance of leadership. But we will see what we can see. But as far as education is concerned, he has cloached this, and I actually agree with him on this, as the means to greater income equality. Because unless we move the education dime, the income inequality will never happen. So he believes both transportation and education. He said, please don't look at this as spending, look at this as investment. And it's not just rhetoric. If you think about it, you in your own home invest in things that will bring better returns to you. You invested potentially in a home so that you could actually have a home, yes, but also get a tax credit, have a place to grow. It was an investment. He's also talking about expanding early childhood scholarships. I have to say a couple of words about Mini Minds now. Mini Minds is the coalition, Parents United is part of it, that is trying to increase scholarships for students. They are also trying to lift the cap. Right now, an early childhood scholarship is $5,000. Many people will tell you it was the Department of Education that said $5,000 is enough. Actually, I remember sitting in the Senate committee when Senator Stumpf said, if there's no one number for all the kids getting scholarships, how are we ever going to account for it in coming budgets? In other words, how do you do that? If you're going to get 11, you're going to get 2, you're going to get 6, how do I know what's going to happen in the future? So, but they're looking to remove the cap so that children who do need an $11,000 early childhood will get it, and those who need $2,000 will get that. So that's a piece that they're working on. They've done some really, really excellent work. And there is some talk about increasing the per pupil formula from the governor. I've not heard that, nor have I seen that in any of the bills that were presented. And then he's adamant about providing greater mental health resources for kids. He's adamant about that, so you can expect to see some of that. Now, what's coming up from the statewide organizations? Now, in Minnesota, there are 11 statewide education associations. There's, you don't need to hear the laundry list of all of the alphabets, but there's the Superintendents Association, there's secondary school principals, there's elementary school principals, there's Education Minnesota, which is the teachers union. There's Association of Metropolitan School Districts from here. There's the Association of the Minnesota Rural Education Association. All of these districts, all of these associations, they sit as the Alliance for Student Achievement. We're partners. We are not members of the Alliance purposely. We never wanted to accept any provision that they may have moved forward, but we wanted to sit as partners to tell them what we thought would be something that people would respond to. We wanted them to have a public view. So we are privy to where they're at in all of their platforms. I took all of their platforms, put them together. These are the issues that there is general support on. So all of these groups believe that there needs to increase the basic per pupil formula. That's probably been on their platforms, well, forever. But one of the reasons for that is in 20 years, Minnesota has increased its per pupil formula by about 1%, where inflation has been at 3.1. So it's no surprise that this is a request every year. And it's also no surprise because you'll notice as that per pupil formula moved 1% and inflation moved 3%, those local levies that we all love getting on the bandwagon to pass are now over $1,000 a piece. It's the same dollar figure. In other words, if inflation had been factored in for the 20 years, the per pupil formula would be about $1,400 more. Guess what? The levies are about $1,400. So it's just been a switch as to who's paying. Facilities funding, they're asking that this task force, again, because these buildings really need help. So they're asking that those recommendations be put forward. They're asking that there be dollars to implement the mandates. There have been a fair amount of mandates in the last couple of years, everything from testing, teacher evaluation is the one you hear a lot about. There's special education. There's several mandates that have come down from the legislature, but precious little money. The rub or the fight is, do you dedicate money to that? Do you say, here's $50 to do that? Or do you just put money on the formula and say, well, just do the mandates now? But that's what they're asking. Align QComp and the new teacher evaluation law. This really gets in the weeds. But QComp was started several years ago. There are 100 plus districts that utilize it. And most, they receive $260 per student in order to implement teacher evaluation. They do a lot of professional learning communities. They do a lot of really good with this money. But the other districts, and we have 341, don't get that $260. And now they have to also implement a teacher evaluation law. So there's some questions as to how you do that. Is there an alignment? What takes precedence? Because QComp was old law, then the new teacher evaluation system came on with new law. So this is a tough nut, and there's been a task force on that. We have a parent on that task force that has kept us apprised of what's going on with that. By the way, we do that. We're often asked to have people on task forces. If you are interested, please let us know. We keep kind of a cadre of people who might have interest in sitting on state level task forces. And also, might I mention that we're also contacted constantly by the press looking for a parent view on Name Your Poison. So if you're again interested in being part of that, please let us know so we can add you to our list, because we scramble because, as you know, the reporter will call and they're on deadline. So they've got 2 hours. Turn it around, find somebody. So if you are interested, please let us know. The other is expanding funding for school-based early childhood programs. School-based, that's the break even here, that's the rub here. And better assessments. This is coming up, and there's a lot of interest in this from my perspective, only because if you haven't paid attention yet to what's going on at the federal level, Congressman John Klein and the GOP is very interested in repealing No Child Left Behind. They are very interested in pulling back the federal requirements of testing and handing those back to states. If that happens, for 12 years now, we've been on this roller coaster doing tests that when really pushed and shoved, you say, why are we doing this testing? The final answer will be to comply with the feds. What happens if that's no longer required? We have an evaluation system tied to that. We have an accountability system tied to that. We have tons of money into that. Are we willing to take a look at what we have if indeed this happens? So I am watching the feds like a hawk to see if they're going to make good on this. So everyone is unhappy with this. No Child Left Behind was supposed to be reauthorized in 2007. It has languished. And the perennial, every year, repeal the school start date. If you don't know, years ago, a deal was struck that Minnesota would not start school until after Labor Day. And this becomes really a big issue. And many, many, many schools say we need more days, we need more time. And I have to say that, you know, the tourism industry is the one that comes forward and says no, 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 as well as the state fair. But they do raise a significant point. They said, how are you using the time you have? There's some interest in that in my perspective. I mean, maybe there is some way to utilize the time better. Okay, I told you that I would stop at intervals for questions. This seems to be a good interval to stop at. So hopefully there's somebody out there. First off, is there any questions from any of our sites? You mean I'm doing that good a job? Okay, and questions from anyone in the room on any of this that's been done. Would somebody get a microphone? Who's got a microphone? I should have given Shauna a little heads up that I'd stop there. Just seemed natural.
Mary, I'll just talk really loud as we're waiting.
Well, they can't hear. You have to. Otherwise,
No, it's fine. It's easy as can be. Early childhood education, does that include early childhood and family education?
ECFE?
Yes.
No, but Senator Uyghur, does it include, yes, scholarships, all of that, yes, it does include, you can use it for that. ECFE, though, has not received very much of a bump in years and years, and Senator Uyghur is very committed to ECFE. In fact, he moved dollars for the first time in ECFE last year. Then I think it was 15 years there had seen no increase. So they're not at odds with each other, but ECFE would be considered school-based early childhood.
Could you clarify what modifications of unrequested leave of absence is?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. You may have heard LIFO. An unrequested leave of absence is this, and I actually have the full statute plus a House Research short subject explaining the actual statute. Not that I get back in the box. You guys can have it too. I'll send it. But what currently stands in law is that a school district, its board, and its teachers union, the exclusive bargaining unit of the teachers may negotiate a plan providing for unrequested leave of absence without pay or fringe benefits for as many teachers as may be necessary because of discontinuance of position, lack of pupils, financial limitations, or larger classes caused by consolidation of districts. So the idea is school boards and their unions can negotiate a process whereby if you need to fire teachers because of finances, because of whatever, they should come up with a process. Barring or not being able to come to agreement in a negotiation, the default is to use an inverse system of layoffs. That's the legislation. Seniority is the word people use, yes. I need you to understand too that the word that's thrown around a lot, and actually I was reading through the pieces, they use the word tenure. If you have any kind of college friends who are teaching, tenure means you have a job for life. That's what tenure means. Please, give me a minute. The word tenure in the college system does. Continuing contract is what we have in Minnesota. We shortcut it to the word tenure, which means that you have a continuing contract as long as the school district has money and has a class for you to teach, and you fit the licensure. It does not mean you have a job forever and that they keep you no matter what. Okay? We use it in Minnesota synonymously, and a lot of people then think tenure means no matter what, if you don't have a class, they still have to keep you. And this time maybe you're, I don't know, in the library. That's not true. You have a contract on a continuing basis unless you are fired for cause, or if you're on an unrequested leave, and if you have not negotiated a process for the unrequested leave, the default is seniority. Area of licensure, absolutely true. Thank you, Ann. Okay?
Okay, my question is, as you've gone over, the first ed bills and the governor's investments and the statewide generalized platform, each of those has, something about pre-K, universal four-year-old pre-K, early childhood scholarship, and expanded school-based early childhood. My question is, so how big a deal, or is it significant that there is no longer an early childhood committee when it looks like this is a strong issue in all these different areas?
Well, there would be two ways to look at that. In some ways, if you had just an early childhood committee, it could be considered that the money that would be utilized in that committee would have to come from some unknown source, because education receives its target. So there is some sense to say if education's bill is an actual E12 bill, then the legislators in that committee must think in an E12 system. I have seen it with where we have an actual education committee, early ed committee, but then the early ed committee is literally begging dollars from DHS and from education to meet their needs. So there is an argument to be made that education as a whole, thinking of it from pre-K or early ed through, has some significance. Sarah's got it.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As I go through the list here, maybe I'm kind of missing something, but I'm wondering, are any of the bills going to be specifically talking about the reduction of the achievement gap? Because I can't quite decipher it in the stuff that I'm seeing.
Okay. Can I answer that question a particular way?
However you need to.
Thank you. It is the role of legislators to align policy and resources to schools so that they can do what needs to be done. If you were looking for legislators to say, you must teach this reading program, you must teach this math program, that is not their role. I think what you'll see a little later on is the world's best workforce legislation that does add 5, not only goals, but 5 requirements that do significantly go at the achievement gap.
And I'd just like to add to that, having heard both the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader this week, and the Chief of Staff from the Governor, that underlies, I mean, yes, it's being talked about constantly at the Capitol. So a lot of the bills are perceived as strategies for doing that. So little sub-strategies, if you want to think about it that way. And there will be disagreement about how best to close it.
Correct. And then, Sarah, why don't we do your question, then go on, please?
I'll try to make it brief, but if the modifying the
ULA.
Yeah, modifying that if seniority is now, I'm understanding, the default
Correct.
mode, what would be, does this mean every district could have the potential to decide then? And what's the thinking on, if it's not seniority, how are those decisions made?
Statute leaves that to the individual school districts to negotiate. They could negotiate that they're fine with seniority as their process. They could say it's a combination of efficiency and seniority. They could say it's purely efficiency. They could say any of that. They could negotiate whatever they want. Statute says if you fail to agree, if you fail to negotiate, it's the default. So it is left to the school districts to do that.
Mary, is this an issue in rural Minnesota?
No. It tends not to be an issue in rural Minnesota. Rural Minnesota is looking for teachers in a lot of ways. And we'll get into that. They're looking for teachers who can be licensed in several areas, so their interest might be more alternative licensure, so that a teacher who teaches physics can also teach chemistry, can also teach biology, because they might be there's a school district that has 150 students, K-12. It would be very hard to keep one physics teacher, one chemistry teacher, one biology teacher. So, okay, so we'll get back to those issues, I'm sure. Okay.
Hi, adding to the achievement gap, I would like to know that is there any scholarship for a parent's education or a parent engagement program? And this is especially to help with parents who are not familiar with the educational system here in America, and also for many parents who have language barrier.
Can I ask what district your children attend?
Osseo School District.
Okay. I don't know if Osseo does it. I know St. Paul has the St. Paul Parent Academy that does that. I know Minneapolis has CPEO that does that. I know Brooklyn Center has their piece that does that. But no, there is money, but it goes to school districts, but it's not necessarily just to teach parents. Those programs are programs that your school district would have to buy into. So your school district could potentially choose to buy into it. I do not know if Osseo has anything. We have a former board member from Osseo here. Maybe we could ask. Can somebody get him? Any questions while we're at it from our 9 sites? Yeah. Okay, you want to hit the question?
Mary, it's
Yes.
not a formal process, but it's part of their strategic planning that they're utilizing to incorporate that process.
I see a question here from Outstate. Integration issues in the session. I would prefer to think about empowerment gap, frankly, but I'm wondering what, if anything, I see emerging around integration, particularly racial integration in this session. What has moved from racial integration has moved more to equity and outcome. We were talking a lot about integration money because of what happened with the EMID schools, what happened around integration aid. Those were the terms that were used for the last 4 or 5 years. Now what people are talking about is more, how do we get equity in outcomes? We used to be happy with access to education. You know, kids could have education. Now the question is, how can we disequally get kids an equal education? In other words, this child needs more time. This child needs more of this. This child needs more of that. How do you do that in a system like this? That's more the conversation. Okay, so I told you what they agreed on. Now these are individually kind of where they're at. So there are several who want to increase the number of teachers of color. There are several who want to restore funding for social workers, counselors, and reduce class size. You see that on a fair amount of them. Amend the passage of state board exams for teachers to change it to require completion of these tests, not a cut score. This is the MTLE they're talking about, the Minnesota Teacher Licensure Exam, that over the last 4 years there's been a lot of fire and light around. So what they're saying is, don't have a cut score on it, just say the teacher needs to complete it. Expand equalization for categorical funds and local levies. This is a way that areas that have low property wealth can compete with areas that have higher property wealth. And remember, property wealth is not factored by how expensive your home is. It's actually factored by how much commercial and industrial you have. People are surprised that Stillwater used to be low property wealth, and Brooklyn Center would have been, no, Brooklyn Park would have been high property wealth. So it's just how much commercial and industrial you have. But At any rate, so they're trying to find a way to make it a little more equal for folks to be able to raise the same dollars for their kids. Expand options for earning teacher licensure to deal with the teacher shortage. This is what you hear a lot of. This, I mentioned licensure for Greater Minnesota. How do you deal with that for somebody? Can they have dual or more licenses? Increase funding for after school, and ABE is adult basic education programs. There's a driving need for this. The adult basic education courses are truly a job creator for a lot of folks. They come in, as you mentioned, from another country or maybe have a second language. They're already adults. Adult basic education helps them move forward in their lives. Change the seniority first statute. MASA is trying to change so that the default is not seniority. Instead, the default would be, and I don't know what word they want to use, effectiveness. So they're interested in changing the statute so that it would pull seniority as the default. So in other words, you would negotiate, and if you do not come to agreement, instead of the default being seniority, the default would be whatever word they want to put in. Increase mental health resources, reinvest in vocational and technical education. This has become a huge mantra. There is request to do this all over the state. Very much bipartisan support. This one I see is moving. There was a career and tech pathways task force that came up with fabulous recommendations. You heard grants for industries that are pushing for apprenticeships. You've got a commissioner and a MinSCU president who are trying to find ways to align this. You're looking for tuition for 2-year programs. You're looking at more dual credit. You're looking at more college and schools. There are ways that people are trying to find so that you can actually do something with your career and vote tech. Okay, at the legislature, what's the rub? And we started with it here. First off, let's just hit the unrequested leave of absence process. We'll go out there. That's the third one. Lynn's in the back shaking her head. So, okay, not significant? Oh, well, I want to make sure that what I'm saying is correct. Okay. All right. Sorry, we had somebody in the audience I thought should speak. Alternative licensure, teacher licensure programs. A couple of years ago, the legislature granted the Board of Teaching the right to kind of put the imprimatur on certain teacher programs as ways for teachers to become licensed, different than going through the traditional system. What you always hear, this is the same thing you always hear, it's the 30-year vet, the scientist from 3M who now wants to become a teacher. Why should they have to return to 4 years of school or 2 years to school and do all the student teaching and all that in order to teach? It's interesting to me because there's a philosophy there that if you understand content, and if somebody could just give you a couple of whatevers, you'd be a great teacher. That's the philosophy. I don't know if I agree with that. But at any rate, so how could that 30-year scientist transfer and become a teacher? That's the question. So the Board of Teaching was given the nod a couple of years ago to be able to, again, put imprimatur on certain programs. Some people will say there's been resistance. Some people will say outright, I don't agree with it. Some people would say no one has applied yet who truly would rise to the level that the Board of Teaching thinks is acceptable. So pick your poison. But that's coming back because people are saying that's languished. What's happened? How do we get more teachers in the classroom through an alternative system of licensure? So that's coming back. And there's rub on that because on one side people are saying, I don't agree with that philosophy. I think a person needs to be schooled in teaching first, content second. Okay, the next thing, the teacher licensure flexibility. I've mentioned that a few times. Again, this one is Greater Minnesota does struggle with keeping teachers or having teachers. A lot of times teachers, it's not unusual, it's not just teachers. You know that there's been a lot of towns that the kids grow up, go to college, and leave the town. Well, these towns are really important. So how do you keep really effective, great, well-educated teachers there? So that's what they're trying to do, and how do you get them? So how do you make that happen? Well, if you give teacher licensure flexibility, the other side of that is Minnesota's always had a high level of teacher quality as far as qualifications. In other words, in Minnesota, you can only teach in your major field. That's really unusual. The rest of the country is like, wow, that's pretty unusual. The second thing is that there's very little reciprocity. And a lot of states, if you have a teacher license anywhere, come on over. The other thing, Minnesota, 97% of the teachers are teaching in their major field. So there's not even waivers for those folks. So that's the other side of this. Wait a second. We've got a teaching force that has met high qualifications. If we're looking at teacher licensure flexibility, will that change the teaching force? You see the difference there? Do you see the rub? Okay. The other is the unrequested leave of absence. Simply put, and this is an important component, and if you want, take a look at that sheet I sent, plus also I'll show you the actual statute. There are probationary teachers. The first 3 years of teaching, there is no continuing contract or tenure offered until the 3rd year. Most people see that those teachers can be and are fired, let go, relieved of their positions at will. That's what happens. Because there is no continuing contract, there had been no continuing contract offered. After the 3rd year, you say to the teacher, I think you are capable, we would like to hire you. So we will offer you a continuing contract. Prior to that, they are let go pretty much every year. That is the same in most states. When I was a teacher in Illinois, we used to have April 1st was the fire date. So we used to have pink slip beers at the end of the day for all the teachers, because everybody, all new teachers, were let go 2 years in a row. Then your 3rd year, you'd find out if you were going to get a continuing contract or not. And one of the reasons for that, which is so hard for me, but the legislature completes its work in May. It can take till July before school districts know how much money they have to expend. So they won't know how many teachers they can afford. So they let go all probationary teachers until they know how much money they have, and then they go back and try and get teachers. Now, a lot of probationary teachers, I've talked to so many graduate classes of teachers who say, I can't take the not knowing year after year. I want to get an apartment, I want to get a car, I want to be in a place. I can't do this. And by the way, it's continuous service. So if you're in St. Paul 1 year, you're in Minneapolis, the next year you're in Stillwater, the next year. I knew one teacher who had taught in 10 districts in 10 years. Simply because her licensure was very specified and only certain districts would have her class. She never received continuing contracts, she never received tenure. So that's one side of the fence. And those are the people that lots of times people go, wow, you hung on to this old teacher and you let go this really cool new teacher. That's kind of what you hear a lot. Well, the reason for the probationary period is to find out, do you want to offer that teacher full continuing contract? Because once you do, and every one of you here is protected, every one of you here is protected by something in the law called due process. If you are fired from your job because of money, oh well, That's it. If you are fired from your job for cause, oh well. But if they just let you go, you can say, why? Show me my last evaluation. Show me where you told me I wasn't doing a right job. Show me, and then prove to me that that's happened. That's called due process. That is what firing a continuing contract teacher is. So there's kind of the rub on both sides. There are great new teachers who cannot get their foot in the door. Is there a possibility that you could offer a continuing contract to a first-year teacher? That actually is a possibility. But a lot of principals and superintendents would be very concerned because usually it takes a couple of years to know if this is somebody that you want on your staff for an extended period of time, and the only way you can get rid of them then is through due process. So most people hold on those 3 years. So that's the rub on that one. Increasing school choice. Again, this is a philosophy that the problem with the public school system is that there's not enough choice. Parents, children need totally different kinds of schools. I find that interesting in Minnesota. I could agree with this in some states, but Minnesota has the oldest charter school legislation in the nation, 1991. We also, for 26 years, have had open enrollment. Many people don't know. You can bring your child, and if there's room at the school, you can go to Elk River. You have to transport, because it makes sense that you and I should not have to pay for a child from Stillwater to go to Elk River every day on a transportation. But if I wanted to, that's exactly what I could do. So I have the choice of any district and any school that has room. So it's hard for me to say we need more school choice, but on the other side, there are the people who say, absolutely. And the scholarships, the early childhood scholarships, the thing that's very interesting about that is if you give a scholarship to a preschool parent and say, you can select any one of these schools, all right? And they have to be 4-star or on their way to 4-star, rated by Parent Aware, and you can actually go to any school you want. Are we actually growing a consumer base that comes to kindergarten and says, but I had a ticket to any school I wanted, now don't I have a ticket to any K-12 I want? Well, I kind of want to say, you've always had a ticket to any K-12 you want, but that's an interesting conundrum as we move forward. We need to consider that. But you'll see a lot of talk about increased school choice. And then you may have heard that the grad test was repealed last year. The grad test was a test made specifically for Minnesota. It didn't cross over to any other state. You had to pass it in order to graduate from high school in Minnesota. The math portion, passing the math portion of it was equivalent to getting a 23 on an ACT for every student to graduate from high school. That's an amazing bar. In fact, we are constantly fighting with Wisconsin as to who has the highest ACT score. We usually win at 22. But now what grad test said is everybody's got to get a 23 just to graduate. So that's been under contention for many years. So what was changed in the last 2 years was now students go through this suite of assessments. They take the Explore in 8th grade, the Plan in 9th grade. Both are predictive of what you'll get on an ACT. They also have career components to tell you kind of what you seem to be good at this point. So if you want to add more math, that'd be a good idea. If you want to add more English, that would be whatever. So that's where it stands. And right now the legislation said, and then you take the ACT. The purpose? You now have a ticket to any college you want. And it crosses borders. So you graduate from high school here, you have an ACT test score. You can go to Ohio, you can go to California, you can go anywhere. So that's great. Now, the rub here is there are some who now want to put a cut score on that ACT in order to graduate. So in some ways, we're back to the grad test. So what would that cut score be? Because honestly, any of you who are parents of children going into college, you can get into college with an 18 on an ACT.
13.
A 13, thank you, a 13 on an ACT. So if I'm a parent and my kid gets an 18 and can go to X college, yet is refused high school graduation from the state of Minnesota. So watch that, because that's the rub with that one, but I'm sure it's going to come in. And then this MTLE, again, the MTLE was a similar idea as the grad, only for teachers. We wanted our teachers to have a higher bar to cross. Now they do all their testing and all their tests. There used to be there is this test called the Praxis, which teachers take all over the nation. You have to pass the Praxis. Well, Minnesota a couple of years ago thought that wasn't stringent, rigorous enough. So they came up with the MTLE that they devised strictly for Minnesota. And in it, it is the equivalent of taking your second year math in college. Now, if I'm out of school for 10 years and I need to take an MTLE to get a license in Minnesota, my chance of remembering sophomore math from college is diminished. So, and secondly, there are some people who want the MTLE taken before they're admitted to a college of education. Well, if I haven't taken my sophomore math courses, yet my test is going to be on my sophomore math courses, how is that going to work? So those are issues around the MTLE that I think you're going to see back up again, but it's a very, very, very difficult situation. But those are kind of the issues those are just the issues right now. And again, remember, session started a week ago. So this is all going to change in a matter of days and weeks. But right now, this looks like what's happening. I just want to also mention that there's an implementation of prior legislation that we can't forget. There's been a lot of legislation passed in the last 4 or 5 years that is at this point of being implemented, and these are some of the top ones. This universal preschool for 4-year-olds is something that there are some parts that have had this implemented, but it hasn't really worked. So Safe and Supportive Schools Act, that's the anti-bullying, that's just going into process. LEAP, this one is fabulous. Minnesota is the first in the nation to pass this legislation, and there's a lot of angst over this, there really is. New York looked at this legislation, but said that they might pass it this year, but Minnesota moved ahead. And what this is it's English language learning legislation. And what it does in a nutshell is we have been very focused with English language learning on teaching children English. Sounds logical. At the expense of content. The LEAP legislation says content is the reason for English language learning services. So if a child is pulled out of math in order to learn English, that's wrong. We have to, in Minnesota now, find ways to teach children of multiple languages content.
And if you think about it, like if you think about an immersion model.
And
I'm sorry.
I had a sort of an aha moment with this when I was thinking.
the box.
The box. Sorry, thank you. I had an aha moment about this during the last session when I thought about all of my English-speaking friends' kids going to immersion schools. They're going to immersion schools to learn a specific language, but they're taught content all day long. They're not pulled out separately to learn English. Yes, they have an English class some of the time, but the majority of their day is spent learning content through a foreign language. So.
Thank you. So that really flips things on a dime, and Minnesota being the only and the first state to do that is pretty interesting, and I think pretty forward thinking. How do we do it? That's why this is implementation stage. World's Best Workforce, and we'll talk about that a little bit longer. That's the one that sets up 5 requirements for every school district in the state that they have to meet. And those are where closing the achievement gap is on top of the game. Plus, Minnesota had a waiver for No Child Left Behind that changed its accountability system out to the MMR, the Multiple Measurement Rating System. The way to get points for a school now is how fast are you closing your achievement gap. So those are 2 things that have been in operation. They're still being implemented that are very unusual. Teacher evaluation is just on a roll. Actually, I have an issue with this only because the legislation is great, because bluntly, there was no statute that required teachers to be evaluated every year, or there was every 3 years for probationary. That was a flaw, and so this teacher evaluation is great. The issue I have is that, again, there are 341 school districts. They can all come up with their own evaluation system. It's a negotiation. They come up with their own evaluation system. That's going to be very difficult. So they all come up with their own evaluation system. Are you going to be able to say this school district and compare teachers in different school districts, and how long is it going to be before people try and do that and then find out that the evaluation systems are different? So it's very important that we understand that they are going to be different. The state did devise a default model. We had a parent on that. And the default model is really excellent. And I'm hoping that a lot of school districts marry that default model. But there's nothing in statute that requires that. Aligning new teacher evaluation legislation with QComp, I mentioned that before. That's ongoing. The task force is trying to do it. It may require more legislation. It may not. We don't know at this point. And then alternative teacher licensure process, again, they're trying to, part of this is being implemented, part of it is going to be changed, or they're going to attempt to change the way this process is. This new suite of assessments, the Explore, the Plan, the ACT, that is just coming off the ground. That is just starting, and it's changing so many things. It's got to be implemented. I'm going to guess there may be tweaking. Is there going to be a cut score on ACTs? So there's a lot of tweaking that could be on that. And the career and technical strategies, there's a lot that were required or recommended in the Career Pathways Task Force that really would be a cool thing if we could see it move forward. I'm particularly fond of apprenticeships, internships, finding ways for kids to get college credit in high school before they get to college, finding ways to get certificated quickly out of school. A few points to remember. First off, what legislation provides, new legislation can change or repeal. I think this was the first aha moment I ever had when I was at the legislature, is I walked in and there were whole pages of statute just wiped out with a bill. And if it passes, all those statutes go away. So anything that's in here could go away. The other thing, and this is important, we used to have a per pupil formula that was $5,382. It's now $5,806. And people go, well, heck, we have $500. No, actually schools got 80. Now, how does that work out?
New math.
It is absolutely new math. But I will tell you how this worked so that you know. First off, until 2015, kindergartners were worth percentages of the per pupil formula. 6.12 for a kindergartner, 1.115, 1.06, 1.3. No one was worth 1. And the per pupil formula was that. Now add $80 and change the pupil weightings. That's what happened. So simply by changing pupil weightings, $80 became almost $500. Now, this is really critical too. There are a lot of Health and Human Service formulas have built-in inflation. So this year it's $1, next year it's $1, the next year it's $2. Well, education doesn't. It's really important to know that. Special education does have an inflator built in, but no other formula in education does. So HHS is critical, and I think they're right to be inflated. But it's important to know, if I'm in HHS and saying, I have a 1 cent cut out of my $1. Okay, I have $1 this year, $1 next year, I'm getting a 1 cent cut. Am I getting a 1 cent cut? If I have $1 in education and I'm getting a 1 cent cut, I'm getting 99 cents. Am I getting a cut? There is the difference. And you need to know that, because lots of times the two areas of the budget that are massive, education about $17 billion, HHS $13 billion. But again, that's why we got caught with so many large local levies, because it made up for having inflation.
Well, in fact, Mary, doesn't that mean that even if education holds steady in real dollars, it's getting cut?
You might say that.
Okay.
There are senators who've told me no. There are House representatives that have said no. I've even had one person say to me, every new dollar is new to you, and if I choose not to give it to you. There's nothing in legislation that says this 5806 has to stay the same next year or inflate. It could drop to 5706. I mean, it's totally and completely up to legislators as a method of balancing the budget. And they do that the first year in every biennium. So, okay, just so that you know, this would be inflated dollars. Would have been about $1,500 more if we actually factored inflation in. The world's best workforce legislation, I want to spend a minute on this, actually answering your question on achievement gap if I can. World's best workforce legislation was brought forward by the chair of education finance in the House a couple of years ago, Paul Marquardt, who's a teacher from Dilworth, and he believed that it was really important. This is not parent involvement, this is public participation in educating kids. He thought that was very important. He thought every community should be able to be and was entitled to be in a position to help their schools do well. This doesn't mean you're standing in an auditorium screaming at the school board that what they should be doing is this. This means that there's a sandbox, if you will, that both the community and the schools work in to help kids. The absolute gold standard of this would be in fact, I was working with one district that came up with this idea, it's great. They said one of our big problems in our high school is that a lot of our kids are working too late at night. They're working till 11 or 12. So this advisory committee for the world's best workforce, made up of community members and school members, decided that they were going to ask all employers of teenagers in their community to not schedule kids after 9 p.m. as their way to commit to helping students do better. It's a great idea. It's a great idea. That's the kind of thing that this legislation is trying to push. How do you engage your community in actually helping educate students? So the requirements for every single school district, first off, and this is unique because this has never happened, every school district needs to increase the amount of kids, the number of kids ready for K. Well, remember what a school board is elected to do. It has always been the K-12 system. What control do they have over preschool? And yet, that's where this takes part. So instead of throwing your hands up as a school board member and say, oh, I can't do anything about this, this legislation is trying to say, how do you join with your community to make this happen? Maybe your school board starts meeting with a council of all preschools on a very regular basis. Maybe that's what you do. And one thing that could be done, could there be one test in this state for kindergarten readiness? Did you know there are 341? Might be nice. I actually am nannying my grandson in St. Paul, and I said, how do I know if he's ready for K? What am I looking for? I don't know. So everybody has to do that. So now this is the community and the school board forced, if you will, hopefully cajoled, to work together to do this. The second thing is all third graders reading at grade level. Now, how does that include after-school programs, YMCA programs? How does that include the stay-at-home moms? How does that include I'm trying to think of the Red Balloon, the bookstores in town? How does that include all of these different components to make this happen? Stillwater at one point had a great program called Born to Read. They worked with their Rotaries, their Chamber of Commerce, their hospital, the doctors, the nurses, and anywhere the children were, there were books deposited, much like these little library books in the urban core, and kids were encouraged to pick them up and take them home and drop a book back again. And they were encouraged in every place they went that reading was great. That's a community who pulled together to do just this. What does your community do? What can your community do this? It's also been pretty well researched that if you're reading by third grade, you have a much better chance of succeeding. So a lot of what we see as achievement gaps, can we actually mitigate that by working really hard on this? The state has done some wonderful work to help this. There are dollars now that can be expended. You used to only be able to use special education dollars at a certain point if a child was 2 years behind their reading level. Well, wait a second. So you have to wait till third grade to find out that a kid doesn't read, and then you start them on intervention. Oh, there's an idea. So now you can expend dollars, and there's a lot of early intervention dollars so that you can get kids in kindergarten. It is said that every first grade teacher knows who cannot read by about the end of the first week. So is there a way that we can target those dollars and get the kids their help early so that this is the next goal of the world's best workforce? Close all achievement gaps, all academic achievement gaps. They use the word academic purposely. One of the questions that came from one of the sites was it's an empowerment gap. I've heard opportunity gap. All of these are true. If you look at our state, we have gaps in health insurance, we have gaps in income, we have gaps in housing, and we have gaps in education. I'm always known to say, you want to increase education proficiency, you want the best policies to help, here you go. Universal health care, affordable housing, livable wage, and a transportation system that helps people stay where they are. You don't have to give another dollar to education, you're done. So all of those gaps feed into this academic gap. Conversely, we need to close that academic gap so we can push the others up. But that's a tough road. But I'm tired and concerned that people are only thinking it's academic. We have to be more honest with ourselves. Graduate all students from high school. Right now, Minnesota does an okay job, but we're one of the top in the nation, but it's primarily for white students. And as our community is becoming so much richer with so many more people of color coming in, new citizens coming in, we have to find a way to be able to educate children that don't look like what is now called the majority. Because you know what? By 2020, the minority, whom we call minority in our schools, will be the majority. That's going to happen in Minnesota. So we are going to find ourselves in a position that we don't know how to teach the kids who we need to teach. So at last, have all students college and career ready. One of the reasons I like the need for this ACT, and you can also take the military test or an AccuPlacer to find out where you're at with this. I believe that's also in statute. So that says to kids, this isn't the end. And we have an opportunity to know if they've got a career ahead of them. That means that each local district needs to develop their own district goals. But they must conform to how are you increasing the number of kids that are ready for kindergarten? How are you getting kids ready to read at 3rd grade? How are you closing achievement gaps? How are you getting kids all graduating from high school? And how are you making them college and career ready? They have to have strategies that meet those goals. In other words, this monthly meeting with the various preschools in our district. And we're going to tell them, and we're going to decide collaboratively, this is the test, this is the measurement we're going to use to say if you're ready for K. And then we're going to be tracking it. That would be a strategy linked to the goal. And that would be something you are required to do. The last is, you align the district budget with the strategies. This one is one that's great. I work with districts on this, and people go, how do I do that? That's interesting. We should be able to align what we do. And I actually agree here, which I cannot believe I'm going to say, that as opposed to looking for new money, I can't believe I'm going to say it, are there things that you're doing that maybe are not going to move the dime on these goals? That you maybe should start thinking, that's not working. Let's move to this. I think that's pretty fascinating. And I think that's what this legislation's trying to push. Again, first in the nation, folks. Design an annual meeting to share results and gain community input. It's what they have to do. Now, this one is really difficult for people because most schools are used to, again, you put the school board and a couple of administrators and always the superintendent up on the platform, up on the auditorium stage in the high school auditorium, and you put up a couple of mics and you let people come and beat you up. How is that helping anything? There are ways with, everything from World Cafe to collaborative models to ways to survey your groups so that you can actually see, do you see what's happening? Can you help us in your role? I always say the gold standard here is when that McDonald's person stands up as a manager and says, you know what? What can I do in my role as manager of this McDonald's to help you? That's interesting. Maybe you want to have an apprenticeship for the student who's working for you, or an internship for the person who's working for you. Maybe you don't want to keep him after 9 o'clock. Maybe what you want to do is start, I don't know, pulling kids together in a work group once a week to talk about careers. These are things you, in your role, can do. You don't have to come to school and mimeograph things. You don't have to come to school and tutor. You don't have to come to school and support what we are doing. What you have to do is enrich kids' lives and make the idea of college and career readiness meaningful. That's what this legislation calls for. I want you to know that the Capitol's shrink-wrapped. So it's very difficult to get there. I want you to know that we're always the ones saying, go visit your legislator, come on down, we're there every day, come meet us. I want you to know the next couple of years is going to be tough. Parking is really limited, I have to let you know, but worse, public bathrooms are like non-existent. If you want to use the porta potty and it's really cold, you can't wash your hands because that's frozen, so just keep it in mind. No, it's not true of the House. This is the Senate. All the conversation about looting the new Senate building, I'm like, yeah, like yesterday. The Senate is down to 3 meeting rooms. So meetings now will probably be Monday through Saturday and many in the evenings, especially as we get up and rolling. as opposed to pretty much Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday were the set meeting times, Mondays and Fridays used for travel, and being back in your home district meeting with your constituents. So they're going to have to expand it. Meetings are going to be really rough to know when they're going to be and where they're going to be. If you want to know, make sure you're following us on Twitter, because we will tweet when meetings have been changed. So it's Parents United MIN is our handle. Parents United MN is our handle. The Senate chambers will be closed in 2016. So the idea has already been floated. How about a one-year session? Used to be a one-year session prior to the 70s. Minnesota has a part-time legislature, which means they meet once in 2 years and deal with the budget, and that's it. In the 70s, we started getting very used to having 1 year for a budget and 1 year for bonding or capital improvements. So 1 year you manage your budget, balance your budget, and then the second year comes along, and what you try and do there is you try and come up with a bonding bill where you borrow money, much like a mortgage, and try and deal with the infrastructure needs of the state. There's a suggestion, because no one knows where the Senate will meet, that we try and do that in 1 year. That would necessitate not only balancing the budget, but also doing a bonding bill. That could be really intense, but it is possible. And some people, David Henn, who's the minority leader in the Senate, Senator Henn was saying, what if we did the budget prior to the end of May, and then worked on bonding kind of at the same time, came back for a special session in the fall to just finish the bonding bill, then shut down and allow the capital to be, the renovation continue. So keep an eye on that. Okay, so at that point, let's stop again and see questions. Hi. Hi.
Hi. I have a two-part question that is combined. So what percentage of the kids would not graduate with a 23 ACT? And are the same people who are pushing the ACT also looking at trying to graduate all students from high school?
The ACT cut score?
Yes.
There has been some talk. I can't answer your first question. I will tell you that about 40% could not make the grad, the math portion of the grad, so I would assume it would be that or more. The second question, I can say, when asked that question, they float the idea of a dual diploma. One would be a completion diploma, one would be an actual high school diploma from the state of Minnesota.
So they graduate on a technicality?
It's not a technicality. There are states that have had dual diplomas. I know of several. And a completion diploma is considered lesser. So if you have, let's say, a requirement for a job, they will say a completion diploma is not acceptable. That's the answer some people will give.
Given that scenario, do they then have an option to stay on to increase that score and access the other diploma?
I don't know that. If you are special needs, you can potentially receive education longer than when you're 18, free. But I do not know. And 21 if you're of special needs. Yes, or special circumstances, yes.
A lot of this stuff really excites me. I'm a former kindergarten teacher. I'm a stay-at-home parent to small children. There's some stuff that really concerns me, though. And part of I'm not sure if this is going to be a succinct question, but just a general, how do I, as a parent, I think I have a lot more power as a parent than I did as a teacher. Because as a teacher, I was a whiner. I wasn't, always grubbing for more money, whatever excuse you want to come up with. But as a parent, I feel like I have a lot more power. And one of the things that concerns me about some of these things, like all third graders reading at grade level, all students ready for K, is this pressure that's being put on early childhood for developmentally inappropriate expectations. So how do I not sound like a nut when I'm talking to or writing to legislators about the things that need to change in the education system, and tie in the knowledge that I have from this meeting and the research that I do about legislation, but also bringing in this idea that it may not be developmentally appropriate for a 5-year-old to be reading by the end of kindergarten, and that doesn't mean that kid's a failure, and so they need all of these interventions and et cetera. Is that?
Well, first off, you need to know that not only are you not alone, I would say you probably represent 60 to 70% of the population. So I think we'll see this trend scoot back again, but there's a lot of concerns about that. So no, you're not a nut, and you wouldn't sound like a nut. And one of the things we need to do is we need to continue beating that horse and saying, that's an awful thing, beating that drum and saying, I'm so sorry, I don't beat horses, and saying things like, you know what, this isn't developmentally appropriate. We have been saying for a couple of years now, we're all for assessments, but we want better assessments and less testing. And so I would say we want age-appropriate, developmental appropriate education for kids. And I think we just say it and say it and say it. And what you'll do that I've learned is you'll free up other people who are fearful of saying it, and they'll come out of the woodwork.
I hope this is a question, but it might be more of a comment as well. Regarding increasing school choice, I agree with everything you said. When I used to give tours at my kids' elementary, I would tell parents, you know, throw a rock, there's a great kindergarten around you. So we already have a lot of choice, as you said. But I'm adding into it all your discussion about some of the first bills talking about facilities improvements, etc. In Minneapolis, it's a joke that every 5 years, you know, you're going to switch schools or something and rotate. And I've gone through that in my lifetime from my high school to now my kids are in 8th grade. Long story short, the people who are talking school choice increasing, are they implying transportation as well? That's one thing. Number two, is this a resurrection of that whole voucher discussion, which maybe, even if it is, again, why? And number three, how do they propose to manage the capital costs if it's simply voting with our feet and we like this school this year and in 3 I like this other school?
All of those are real scenarios. I can't answer that. That's why we have to watch what's happening, and that's why we have to speak up when it happens. You know, there are people who say the choice Minnesota has, as far as, you know, you're able to choose any school in the state, is really not a choice because it's not transportation. So you find people pushing that as well. But school choice, unfortunately, has this lightning attached to it, which really shouldn't. But no matter what we do with school choice, our contention is we need to make sure that there's a system for 100% of our kids to start in and move forward. And that system includes private schools and charter schools and all sorts of public schools and magnet schools. Joe's got a question here. I wish I could answer your question with don't worry, it's all taken care of, and sprinkle happy thoughts here. That would be a lie.
So thanks for the comprehensive overview. One of the things that you mentioned was that the governor and some Democrats and some Republicans are deeply interested in expanding the opportunity for high school students to take college level courses right in the high schools. We had a very contentious discussion about post-secondary options in 2014, and you and this organization were very helpful, I think, in trying to get a rational discussion about that. But one of the things that's important for people to know is that a bipartisan coalition has formed to provide more funds to help people create new options right within the high school so that youngsters can earn credit without leaving the high school campus. Now, some PSEO, post-secondary options, is a great option for some, but there is a group of people, rural, urban, suburban, who've been working on this for 6 months, and you've provided some great advice about that. Just want people to know that that is focused on providing new resources, additional resources for high school students and for high schools to create new options within the high school. We have a booklet that, with your permission, I'm going to pass out that describes student essays describing it, but the focus for many of us in terms of the college cost is going to be, at least in part, to create new options right within the high school.
And Joe has actually been, the driver of the dual credit. Now you need to understand that 10th graders are able to be in PSEO. That's not necessarily, everyone knows that. It will take a particular 10th grader potentially to do that. They need to qualify, but it's a wonderful opportunity. Joe's work has shown some amazing results. Students who have never thought of themselves as college material have gone and taken the dual credit courses, and all of a sudden they're like, I can do this. And it's a different world. We are so supportive of dual credit, and any dollars that we can get in the hands of schools so that they can do that, it's much like those grants to industries. Why aren't we doing this? When I was in Stillwater as a board member, we thought this was kind of a cool idea. So many of our seniors had really finished the majority of their coursework by the end of their junior year, that we thought, what if we had a center for them, got apprenticeships and internships for them all over the community, and had them come back to the school once a day or twice a week, something like that, share what they're learning, have mentors there, help them with the coursework. Only the students that had completed everything they needed to complete, all of their requirements, would be allowed to do this. Wouldn't it be a heck of an incentive for these kids? We were shut down by our community. And I swear it's because the community, I think, was not thinking ahead about what we need. So I think that's where we're at. I think we're at a place where kids, seniors, they used to call it senior slump. It's kind of a nice word for the fact that kids are done. So, but you know what? If we're paying for these kids to be in school, and this compulsory age, if that goes through and now it's 18, what can we offer them while they're there? That would be fabulous. Did you have somebody out there, Shauna? Shauna, where? Oh,
I've got
okay,
one thing.
thank you.
Sorry I didn't speak up earlier. Lynn Northgren, Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, because I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was clarifying some stuff. I just want to take a minute or two here, because a really big thing that's going to come up that you're already seeing ads about on TV is this whole thing of tenure and seniority, which are two different things, but they're often put together as if they're one. We in Minneapolis have created, through our contract for a very long time, things like achievement and tenure. So you have to achieve your probationary thing. We have mentors and coaches, and we make sure that it's like a seal of approval, that we think you're a good teacher now, we think you're going to go on to be a very good throughout your career. However, once you achieve that tenure, it doesn't mean that you do have a job for life, as Mary said, but I think people get confused by that. They think it does. It does in college, but not for us, and it really never has. It's really about due process. When I was a probationary teacher, I could have been fired on the spot. My principal called me in one day and said, "How dare you?" I said, "Oh man, what did I do?" I was visiting the homes of my students, and he didn't like it, because he didn't like one of the parents, and he thought that I was challenging his authority. I was not, but I could have lost my job on that day had I not been very good at explaining what I was doing. And so we don't want that kind of thing happening. We do then, as a union, try to help protect the teachers when that kind of thing happens. When you are tenured, it just means you have a voice. It means that you just can't have a principal at the end of the year say, you challenge me in meetings and I don't like it, so you're fired. When I was a new teacher 40 years ago, I saw lots of people of color, gay men, others that some principals just didn't have a fond feeling for, just say to get them out, get people out. So the law around seniority came about so that some people couldn't do that. That you had to then have a number instead of be just hired or fired at will. So really tenure is to also protect our good teachers, to make sure that we just aren't thrown out the door. It does not mean, though, we're also protecting ineffective teachers. So over 20 years ago, and I was a part of this, we created in Minneapolis, and St. Paul has a similar thing now in most of the state, where We have a professional development process. Everybody has to write a plan. They have a team. And then we have a professional support process where if you're not making it, then you have a mentor and a coach. And if you're unwilling or unable to improve, you'll lose your job. And most people that go through that often voluntarily leave because they get the aha. We have standards of effective instruction. We have all kinds of support for people if it's not, because we don't really want to fire a lot of people because we need people. It's expensive. We are going to have a huge shortage of teachers coming up. It's another reason we don't pink slip our teachers in Minneapolis when they're probationary. We give them usually a contract in the spring unless we feel that they're not achieving tenure well. But otherwise, so a lot of these things have to be fixed, but it just isn't true. And I can also tell you this, if somebody screws up badly, it's a disciplinary thing. If they've done something very wrong, they can be fired by tomorrow. And so this whole big mantra that's been out there, we really have to stop it. We have a lot of teachers who are leaving, and a lot of teachers telling their own children not to become teachers, and a lot of other people not coming into teaching because it's just gotten so wacky. And so, if I could just use that very scientific term.
Thanks, Lynn. I
So
appreciate
thanks.
that. One of the reasons that I think I'm so concerned about people having the actual language is because when I was a school board member, I would go to a school and a parent would come up to me and say, well, my kids can't do this because you made this decision. I said, what decision did I make? And what are you talking about? She said, well, I went to my principal, and my principal said it was a board decision. I said, really? So I would go to the principal and say, what board decision? And in some cases, they thought it had been, because it went through the grapevine. In other cases, they just really didn't want to hassle. So let's know the actual terms. And again, the statute, these are reasons for discharge. For a teacher. This is a continuing contract teacher. Immoral character, conduct unbecoming a teacher, or insubordination. Failure, that's failure without justifiable cause to teach without securing a license. Inefficiency in teaching. It's here. People are saying you need to talk about ineffectiveness. Inefficiency to teaching in statute says is a cause. Affiliation, affliction with a communicable disease must be considered as cause for removal. Discontinuance of position or lack of students. So I just want us to push back when people tell you this is the way it is. I keep going back to those parents who told me, well, you made the decision. I didn't. So I would find, as a parent, I was told that there was no way for us to get the names and numbers of the parents in our kids' classes. And I was told that it was a policy, that you couldn't. So I went to the principal, who said, yes, it's a policy. So I went higher, yes, it's a policy. I went higher, yes, it's a policy. Finally, I walked into the superintendent's office and said, may I read that policy? There was no policy. It had become a precedent. We have to stop the precedents, figure out what we have, act on it, and push that before we talk about blowing things out of compliance. Yes, sir, we have a question here. Oh, I'm sorry, Roxy has a question.
I'd like to make a couple comments and then ask a question. I've always said that choice is a choice only if you know you have a choice. And a lot of our communities of second language and poverty don't know they have that choice. So we have a responsibility to educate people. And then I want to comment to Joe, and when my daughter graduated from Johnson High School in 2006, she had IDs from the University of Minnesota, from St. Catherine's, from the community college. We had a partnership with Metro State. They came in and did college in the school, and she graduated college in 3.5 years. So it works. And then the question I have, of everything that's going on with education, what is, who is, or what is paying attention to the emotional and social development and intelligence of children?
Stumped me. I have to say, though, in all honesty, the Safe and Supportive Schools Act in the last 2 years as it was going through, that was the #1 argument, and it was so clearly defined. And the rub that happened there was so eye-opening for me. There were people who came forward who would say, you know what, bullying is just part of growing up. Kids have to toughen up. Those were very loud voices. Then came the voice of those who said, unless a child is safe, they'll never learn. And you don't understand that a child who's bullied is watching over their shoulder every second, and they're not paying attention. So that conversation took place deeply, deeply, and I think was the reason for the Safe and Supportive Schools to move and act and finally go to passage. There also is now a climate center that will be for the state, that the people in that climate center, and their DHS people and education people, talking about just that thing. So it's brand new. I mean, when you think a year ago, people were still fighting about bullying being a good thing for kids, I know it feels like little teeny tiny steps, but it really, it's starting. But no, nothing major, nothing that somebody's putting something through on. Laura said she had here. Oh, this gentleman was.
Can I just add to that, Mary? That Representative Sandra Erickson, who is the committee chair for the Education Innovation Policy Committee.
We'll get it.
She has made a commitment this year, a request, to look further into what she called non-academic factors for the achievement gap and non-academic factors for academic lack of success. So she is asking for input on that. And as well, Senator Bach mentioned too that something that's important to him is looking beyond funding aspects of education that are not tested for. So he said we put a lot of funding into the things that we test for, which are reading and math. And he thinks that, to quote him, was a swing and a miss, and that we need to look more into counseling, into social workers, and to VOTEC, into schools.
Pendulum time, swing, swing, yes.
Back a little bit to the teachers and the example you gave of the individual that has been in 10 different districts. Is there a push, and again, I'm somewhat against forcing things onto a school district, but to give them, after 5 years of teaching in 5 different districts, something that would give them the ability not to have to do that, because again, that makes no sense to me from an employee standpoint or an employer if we have a marketplace that is needing more teachers. It makes no sense for someone, I come from a business background, to have 5 years of accounting and then said, well, yes, you got it at these different places, so it's only worth 1 year.
No, there is no push. Laura said, you know what, I'd like to stop with the questions in about 1 minute, because I'd like to lay the last 5 minutes, if nobody has it, we can go back to questions, but share the knowledge in the room. You guys hearing anything? What are you hearing about the session? Have you got something you want to share that's going to happen, or you've heard something? So I'd really love that last 5 minutes to do that. Then I will stay and answer questions as long as anybody wants, but I want everybody to hear whatever somebody else has to share. Yes?
I'm curious whether the Department of Ed has a position or an opinion about the ACT cut score.
I couldn't speak for the Department of Education. I'm going to say from my conversations with them, they're not particularly interested. But in a cut score. Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, hi, my name is Rick Keller. I'm officially representing the Twice Exceptional and Print Disabled. Last year they put Twice Exceptional to get the statue, however nobody came and spoke for them. That's, I'm very clear on that. The reason I come here today is I find it hard to be engaged in the process when there really is a lot of parents that could be involved in this process. I myself, as a parent of a special ed student, the question I have today, Minnesota statute talks about reading well by 3rd grade. It allows them flexibility, because not every kid can read well by 3rd grade. However, the question I have is that the grad assessment was relaxed last year on the MCAs for reading, and the rule was rescinded regarding the degree of 64 reading. I really can't get an answer from the department about what is the appropriate reading level for kids that pass grad reading assessment. We all know UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is used on the MCA3s to provide an independent reading level. It's my understanding the MCA3s are considered a no and do, no child left behind, a independent assessment, a summative assessment. So if UDL is being implemented, is it being implemented on the ACT? Is it being implemented on the teacher assessments? I think it's relevant to have that the conversation last regarding Parents United, that they'd provide this online in alignment with Statute 16E, which is also required by state agencies to be fully accessible. And hopefully this webinar will also have the conversations for those that so don't go on deaf ears.
Thanks, Rick. I actually can't answer either of those questions. Universal design, I'm not an expert at that. And then secondly, the test scores in 3rd grade, there is some wiggle room and flexibility between somebody being ready or close to proficiency. So there are some people who want a very hard cut score on 3rd grade reading, and then the question is, if a child is not reading at 3rd grade, are they then retained in 3rd grade? So that's another question that will come up. What are you hearing? Yes, sir.
Bob Hammond from Sudan, Minnesota, and I'd just like to give a little feedback on your earlier comments about school trust land being a possibility for financing. I would be very skeptical, because in 2 or 3 years ago we had a lot of publicity about how well Utah is doing with their school trust. My wife Pat and I have a special interest in that, because Pat taught for over a year out in Utah and I was working on an electrical project out there, and we have some familiarity with Utah. Now, some of you may have seen the article in the Star Tribune that was worded to imply that Utah got $1.2 billion out of their school trust this year. And I was immediately skeptical. There's not that much money in the system. And so I just went to their website, and lo and behold, the 1.2 billion was an accurate number for 20 years.
Excellent.
And so as you hear people propose school trust remedies for our Minnesota problems, the latest number I saw that Minnesota's getting a little over 29 bucks per student.
Correct.
I think right now Utah, they're bragging they're getting 49. Probably because they have fewer students, and you can see that amount of money is not going to solve Minnesota's problems. And being I got the microphone, and it's not being ripped away from me.
Rip it away, Shona.
I would like to go back 45 years when I served in an apprenticeship program. And I have fond memories of that program because I was working in a taconite plant, iron mine for U.S. Steel. I was an apprentice getting halfway decent wages. I went to school 1 day every 2 weeks, so that's 5-day weeks. I was getting paid for going to their school. And so I see the situation has changed completely. Those apprenticeship programs are eliminated. They're hiring people out of our vocational system. Those students and us taxpayers are educating their students. And so I have no great argument with the benefits of apprenticeship programs. I had a good one. But I question whether our corporate leadership in Minnesota is going to pick up the cost of apprenticeships. I think we're still going to be paying to educate our students, and we might as well do the best we can to give them a good education. I appreciate this gathering here.
We could have such a conversation about that. Steve Rosenstone, Chancellor of MNSCU, testified in front of the Senate, and his first words out of his mouth were just great. He said, corporate will do so well by this program of apprenticeships, we believe they should pay. So I found that very interesting. Yeah, what are you hearing, Sarah?
Well, one thing I just wanted to raise is the influence of ALEC bills on these education priorities. I'm not saying I'm kind of raising it more for something for people to listen to and pay attention to, and you would know more exactly how much these bills created by the American Legislative Exchange Council, funded by the Koch brothers, are driving these legislative priorities. So I just think that that's something I'm interested in, that I'd like people to also hear about and understand the impact on our legislation. And one thing I just want to ask is, am I missing something, or is there a move to actually add inflation into education funding?
It's talked about every year, but it's considered DOA. You know, you mention inflation and people go, "Blah." So it's whispered to. I promised you to be out by 11. I've broken my promise. I'm very sorry. At this point, anyone who would like to leave because it was 11 o'clock, please feel free. I will stay as long as anyone wants. Are there any questions from the 9 sites or comments? All right, excellent. Thank you so much for taking part in this today. It's our first live streaming. We're hoping to be able to do this for other events. Those of you who are here, we would dearly love to know what topics you would like us to cover for our summit or other workshops. Maybe we have a workshop just on ALEC and tracing lines with legislation. That might be something. You have pads of paper in front of you. If you can think of a summit topic or you think of a great one while you're driving home, please contact us. Let us know. Mary at parentsunited.org. Workshops. I call them wonk sessions. So, all right, now, those of you who leave, goodbye, goodbye, thank you, thank you. The rest of us, back down. Senator Carlson?
Thank you, Mary. This is wonderful to come here and hear this. I took a lot of notes because I hear more clear representation of the facts from Mary than I do when I sit in a committee in the Senate. I do have a question, though, a couple of them, but I can talk to you offline on some of them. But one is, are you encouraging the substitute teachers to be part of the conversation? And I was trying to figure out a way to wiggle in this little anecdote I have. This is my wife, Gail. She taught at Alexander Ramsey, which is now Roseville Area High School, then in Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan, and retired last year. And her best friend had breakfast with her a few days ago, and she is doing substitute teaching. And one of the big things about substitute teaching is you can compare this school with this school. And she was at Blake, and no, by the way, she teaches French, and she's taught all 4 years, and I don't know if she's taught college in the schools, but at Blake, there were 13 kids in the class. And then a few days later, she went to St. Paul Central, and there were 42 kids in the class. Same class, French 1. And you know, the suspicion is that in French 2, because there's 42 kids in the class, that there might be 13 kids in French 2, because they can't learn a language under that circumstance. And so I think what we need to do is, and I wish she would be here and tell you that anecdote yourself, because it's so profound on just what class sizes do and what kinds of things we are looking at in trying to work on this achievement gap, because it is geographical. It is, there's different schools that do different things to attack it, and that's the kind of thing that I think we have to make very public, and we need to speak up about the notion of how much time a teacher can spend with a child, and whether it's reading or whether it's French, it makes a difference. So thank you very much.
There's a member of ours who's a longtime friend who continues to say, if there are private schools within the boundaries of a district who have appreciably lower class size, why can't the state withhold the dollars that go to that private school and utilize them instead for the public school to drive down class size? It's an interesting thought, because there are dollars from the state that go into the private schools. Not a lot, but there are. Yes?
Thank you for this background. It was very helpful. My first visit, and I think I can give you some feedback
new parents to the Minneapolis system are very, very, very interested in funding. So if we can do a summit on how we can increase the pool of money to the schools, how we can be effective lobbyists, because we are really taken aback by the things we're being asked to fund. I think it's outrageous. And it's very hard to hear that the question about inflation, that's dead on arrival. And so if there's anything that can be done to create a movement around branding, bipartisan support for increasing the funding.
Actually, Parents United just finished 2 years of 15 boot camps around the state that did just do that. We did a session on how schools are funded, how schools are governed, and how to make a difference. So we're absolutely welcome to come into Minneapolis and do several boot camps. We've done them all over the state, and it's just on those issues. Any other things that anybody's hearing? Anybody's catching something? Oh, yes, okay.
I was just saying that I know that at least, well, I don't know if they're specifically Minneapolis, but I'm aware of groups of people meeting now and building momentum on the opting out test whole business. And I don't know how public that's gone yet, because I know they're creating their talking points and all. But it again goes back to, if Klein is tying NCLB to testing, blah, blah, blah. We were just talking about this. So I don't know if it is a summit thing, but I'm trying to decide where to go. And then it's ironic, I asked my kids about opting out for the reasons that I do understand. And they go, we don't want to opt out. How will we know how we're doing? So my point is, I think everyone, no matter what side you're on, agrees there's too much testing. So what can we do to cut that back versus just fixing cut scores, et cetera?
That's a fascinating topic. That's a fascinating topic. Yes, sir.
And earlier, you also mentioned statewide school organizations. And I'd like to mention a regional organization that I think might be important coming up. That's the Range Association of Municipalities and Schools. Perhaps you've heard the news already. Senator Tomasoni is going to be the head of that and take a leave of absence during the session. So as you talk about the problem of us working, not fighting each other on the rural and the metropolitan issues, there's another thing.
Excellent, and Senator Tomasoni is a wow, really a wow. So, yeah. Can I say thank you, unless there's, I assume there's nobody left at our 9 sites, but. Oh, they're still watching. All right, no questions, no comments, no.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, good. No, I meant from our sites. Excuse me, I have to give them. Okay. Yes.
I just wanted to say that there's some really interesting work going on preparing for the mandate for personal learning plans for students, to really get them aware of what they need to do to have careers that will be fitting their needs and to be ready for the workforce. And there's so many great needs in education. I'm hoping that there will be some attention paid to the work that has been done for the mandate 120B for personal learning plans.
It would be a fascinating idea to put the assessments together with the 4-year plans, together with apprenticeships for a big summit event. Any other comments? Thank you, everyone. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, I had 2 questions. The first one is that how do we find out to be involved in the task force group? That's one. And then 2 is that because the requirements for all Minnesota school districts that all students should be ready for K, starting kindergarten, and also should read at 3rd grade. So how do school or the community or how do the state communicate to community of colors who are having language barrier to understand? Because it is very critical that in America, parents is their first child's teacher. And so it is important for the parents to understand this concept and then also do their part at home. But how do we communicate? And what kind of strategy that we can support them?
World's Best Workforce requires, in fact, Parents United has been contracted to work with 10 districts on improving the community engagement component for the public participation. And every school district needs to have a World's Best Workforce Advisory Committee that is there saying how the community can work in order to meet those 5 goals. So your district has got to have a World's Best Workforce Advisory. So that would be my first stop, and find out what your district is doing very specifically. How parents find out, you've got a great question, because that's what we try and do. We try and network people. If you're interested in being on a task force, drop an email, mary@parentsunited.org, give me your contact information, tell me you'd be interested in being on a task force, I'll put you on a list, call you to see if you have the availability at the time whenever there's a task force. I would love to have hundreds of parents on that list. Right now I don't. So that's how you would do that anytime, and I mean anytime. When you have a group of parents together, 5 of them, 6 of them, 100 of them, I would be happy to come and talk about all the other issues you're mentioning. And I also could link you with your superintendent and your school board members so that they would have an understanding of your need and see what they're doing to fit the need. So, yes?
Hi, this is my first time here, and welcome. Thank you. And I just wish I'd known sooner about you guys. So, my thing is that, nowadays the school system, they're not providing, the students with the technical support, like keyboard classes and things like that anymore. So I'm trying to get a better understanding of what is the history of that. Why have they got to this point now where they no longer are supporting these kind of skills in the public school system?
Folks, could you take it out a little bit in the hallway so that we can hear, so that our guest doesn't have to shout? Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate it.
And there are, nowadays the workforce requires for you to have a certain kind of technical skill, and our world now is so technically driven. So why are we, now in the school system at an elementary level, not creating these supported technical skills for these students? And are we going to supplement that in a way, whether in middle school or high school? I just want to understand that process, as well as what is their perspective going forward.
The history of keyboarding is they used to do keyboarding and teach keyboarding much like they taught typing. There's nobody in this space, I think, would have taken typing except me. Oh, okay.
Oh, come on now.
I was going to say it was required of girls. That was my thing. It was required of girls.
Education.
Yeah. And they used to teach penmanship in 3rd grade, 2nd and 3rd grade, and bluntly, they found out that boys' small motor skills don't develop till later than that. So we have spent a lot of time forcing little boys to understand that they can't make L's in 2nd grade, but they're stupid and school is for girls, which simply is because they haven't created the small motor skills. They're bigger on large motor skills. So the idea that penmanship was there, they just took keyboarding and put it on top instead. So keyboarding pushed out penmanship. But then, over the last, I'd say, 10 years, they found that teaching keyboarding the way you taught typing was like so boring. And they found kids were coming to them knowing how to keyboard, knowing how to do it. And so there was much less desire to teach it. Now there's more desire to teach coding. So the intent is a child who is really interested, say, in going online, will learn keyboarding because that's the way they get there. So it's the incentive to the student that gets them to train themselves in keyboarding. Does anybody know schools who do basic keyboarding anymore? Yeah, I don't think so. I think the philosophy is kids will pick that up from some other source. Some of them know it before they get to us. Right or wrong, if you feel that there's a need in your school for that, that is a question for the curriculum folks to say to your principal, I think we need keyboarding here, and get their exact answer. One of the things you need to know, Minnesota is called a local control state, meaning they will say to you 100% of the time, it's really the district's choice. And it is. In this case, it is the district's choice to teach keyboarding or not. Great question, though. Anything else? Anybody here? Yes.
First, oh wow, this is loud. First, I wanted to thank you for this event. It's very informative. I'm learning a lot. And I just wanted to talk about core standards, core curriculum, and or common core curriculum. Core. And because you mentioned that if Leave No Child Left Behind is overturned and we don't have any standards of testing, we won't be able to justify it. Is Common Core factored into any of that? I just wondering if you
Common Core is separate. No Child Left Behind is actually a reauthorization of a 1965 federal law called ESEA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It's reauthorized every 5 years. As it's reauthorized, the president who's sitting gets to name it and gets to shape it. It has not been reauthorized. No Child Left Behind came in with President Bush in 2001. It moved so that its push was testing. Prior to that, under Clinton, its push was to get money to schools who were struggling. So it's languished since 2007. What they're talking about doing at the federal level is just pulling the requirement that every state needs to have a testing program that tests 3rd grade to 8th grade every year and 10th grade and 11th grade every year for every student. That's what's being pulled, potentially. Common Core is something that came up actually through the National Governors Association. Many years ago, the National Governors Association said, we should have a common set of standards. Every state has standards. Every state has had to have standards long before No Child Left Behind. Minnesota had sets of standards. We've had sets of standards forever. Common Core said they should be common, state to state to state. Well, it's interesting that these two pieces were really opposed because No Child Left Behind said you need standards, you need to test them. But 50 states, 50 standards, 50 tests. Common Core, on the other side, said we should be teaching a common core, English and math. So Common Core actually came from the National Governors Association. And No Child Left Behind came from legislation. Common Core, the interesting thing about Common Core, interesting whatever, 46 states have signed on to Common Core. Minnesota has not signed on to math. They've signed on to language arts. Minnesota said, we will review our math at our normal cycle of reviewing our standards. At that time, if we feel that Common Core serves our children, we will accept it. And that's just coming up. They believe, though, at this point, that their math standards are more age appropriate and that their math are more understandable, sequencing. So those are two different things. Common Core, however, has been kind of a voluntary. Well, when you have 46 states that have agreed to it, what has happened is the large testing companies have said, well, pick me, we can come up with a test for all 50 states. And by the way, if 46 states have Common Core, and I'm a textbook manufacturer, are my textbooks going to be Common Core? You betcha. So that's the kind of insidiousness of Common Core, because whether we accept it or not, testing companies, textbook companies, in fact, there's a company, Pearson, came up with this great idea where they can take teachers' evaluations, put them in line with the test scores and come up with the effective teacher. They'll devise that for you.
For a fee.
Oh, guaranteed.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so Common Core is separate, and whether we accept or not, or somebody tries to rip that out or not, the point is the market has spoken on this. And we need to, well, And some people believe that it can be turned around. I don't know. What I asked when they came up with Common Core, and I've asked this for years of our Congress people, if you believe there needs to be a common set of standards, why would you not use the standards that are aligned with the NAEP tests, National Assessment of Education Progress? The reason is NAEP has been in operation for a long time, so we can have longitudinal data that shows how kids are doing. Why do you start from nothing, create new standards, which now you have to create a new test for, and you have no data as far as has there been a difference in kids learning? You have no basis. I was told the problem was NAEP is actually not everyone takes NAEP. It's only certain kids. I said, so have everyone take it. I thought that one was easy. But the second thing, and I was told this by two Congress people, two sitting Minnesota Congress people at the time, who said it would make other states look bad because they do poorly on the NAEP. So we come up with what? Common Core standards and new tests, and what, to make some states look good? Like, what are we doing here? So Common Core has a kind of a jaded background, but it was begun with a real intent. I don't quite understand at the time. The National Governors Association, by the way, is also partisan, dependent on how many governors are of one party or the other. So it flips, the partisanship flips. At the time they were moving in this direction. They were on the GOP, and so that's where that moves. So, and it went through too. There's a National Council of State Legislators who were also moving in that direction. So there's logic to it. And the idea is just as kids aren't going to stay in Frazee the rest of their lives, kids aren't going to stay in Minnesota the rest of their lives. So shouldn't we be able to have kids transfer from place to place? And like happens many times in education, sometimes the problem is in the implementation. So, okay, we need common standards. Maybe we should look at what we have. You'll rarely... Pardon?
Don't recreate the wheel. It's already round.
Yeah. You will find it very difficult. I'm not sure what the future for Common Core is. You get somebody next to you. Hi, yeah. Yes. Is that phone? Shauna?
Mary, thanks so much. I'm just wondering if you know what the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce is up to, because they helped pay for the commercial that was misleading about tenure and life.
Whoa, that's a loaded one, huh?
Yeah, I have sat with the chamber in tandem, and I've sat across the table from the chamber. They are committed to education. They believe that data should make the decision. And they believe that whatever funding is now in the schools is enough. I know those two things that they believe in. This idea that a great teacher in every classroom can trump all social issues is really what's driving most of this. And it seems that that's a philosophy. I don't hold that philosophy, but many of the leaders there do. I don't know how to comment. I will tell you that the whole unrequested leave of absence, LIFO, seniority, tenure, whatever words you want to use, are going to play out on the front page of the paper for the next 2 years. There's no question. And it will be an election issue. That's what I mean by starting the 2016. It will be the pivotal election issue. And what will be said, which truly is incorrect, is that it is the rest of the state versus the teachers union. The truth is, this may be an issue in District A, B, C, D, whatever. But as I've tried to point out to you folks, there is a resolution in statute. Whether your district chooses to use it or not is their choice. So should we change the statute for everyone in the state because it's an issue in districts who are choosing not to use the remedy that's in statute? That is the question. So the Chamber of Commerce says yes, change it for everyone. And there are many groups saying that too. Many groups. So I just want people to have the truth as we see it on the actual words on the paper before, so that they can say, but this is true, is it not?
I'm sorry, change it to what? Exactly, change the statute from making it a local control, how you figure out layoffs?
Now the default, the point is the default. If you're going for ULA, if you have to come up with a process for ULA, if you must negotiate the process on ULA, the default would be effectiveness. I'm pulling that out of the hat instead of seniority.
For every district?
Every district.
Where it's not an issue at all?
Correct. Plus, what I'm trying to point out to people is it appears in every statute in that piece I gave you, which nonpartisan put together, the remedy exists. And teachers can be fired, but you need an excellent evaluation and you need to follow due process. So again, the reason I'm so passionate about this issue is not because I'm for one side or the other, but I have been in a position to be told that I made the decision because the principal or the person who was responsible wanted to hedge his bets. And he didn't want to deal with it. And that's wrong. If you're supposed to evaluate and you're supposed to fire, and you can fire. I had a principal once tell me, I can't fire a teacher unless they rape a student on the front lawn of my school. Now, he believed that. He was wrong. So I agree with due process for every one of us. Every one of us. I think if you're fired, I think you should know why, and I think you should have recourse. Every one of us. And that's what this statute gives. Effectiveness, negotiate it. Put it in as well. Go for it. Based on, remember, there are 341 different evaluation systems. I used to be, my teacher evaluation had 10 questions. The 10th was appearance. I always got an F on that one. So 1/10 of my evaluation was based on how I looked. So I don't know what to say. Yes?
Okay, I really had a question way back regarding the reading and so forth, but with this topic, when you say there's no recourse, isn't Minnesota a right to work state? So
No.
where does that play in with?
A right to?
It is, because I don't, it is. Minnesota is a right to work state.
No. No. A right to, there are 31 right to work states. Right to work state means no union negotiation. We have unions.
Well, you can be fired for no reason
In Minnesota?
in Minnesota.
From at will, yes.
At will.
We're an at-will state. That's, yes, you
I just
can.
know you can be.
Yes, you can.
But there's due process.
But there's due process. If you're fired at will, you have due process to ask why. Unless there's an absolutely apparent financial reason or your job has been pushed aside. If your job is still there and it's going to be filled the next day and they say to you, you're gone, you do have recourse for due process.
Mary, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, that I was sitting here earlier and this is kind of bugging me. You have to be real careful about when you're talking about teachers and people in unions, and when you're talking about the everyday Joe and Jane like me, when I'm at work, at an at-will state, Minnesota, I can be fired because my boss didn't like the color of my shoes. I have no recourse. I might get unemployment, but they're not gonna hire me back. They can, in Minnesota, it's the usual, you cannot be fired based on gender, race, religion, and whatever's in the affirmative action stuff. But I was sitting here going, well, she must be talking about just teachers. But just so you guys are clear, you can get fired for sneezing. I mean,
But you do have recourse.
But you can't be forced to be rehired. You cannot be forced to be rehired.
No, you can't. But you can.
Wait. Who's the you? Do
Yes,
teachers have
who's you?
recourse or
No,
does anyone?
teachers have recourse.
Right.
Teachers have recourse. Union employees. But I would argue that at least in every corporate setting I've been at, where you have evaluations, they have to show that you have some sense. That's very strange because I've never heard that.
You can be fired for having the wrong shoes, and you can't be forced to be rehired at that same company.
Well, I know you can't force, but
So there may be some monetary
Yes.
remedies, but that's different than being told that.
Right, but there are remedies. You can have monetary remedies because you can say, okay, well, that's interesting.
So there is a difference.
I'm going to look up the statute on it, Will, because the corporates that I have dealt with say that they have to follow due process. So that's interesting. Have you known people who were fired for the shoe color?
well, no, I know people who were fired because class didn't like a bumper sticker they had in their car.
Okay.
But what I want to say, Mary, is you and I can talk.
Yeah, no, I'd be really.
I worked in HR and corporate.
Okay,
Not
great.
that I'm an expert, but I'm
No.
just saying-
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Well, then I can tell you teachers have due process.
Yes.
Mary,
But right to work states, no. There are 31 of them.
we were talking in the office the other day about due process and then about the parent concern and the parent voice behind this and trying not to pit teachers against parents. Can you say more about where some of that parent concern comes from and how they can feel like they have what their role in that process is, or if they have concerns about a teacher, where they go with those concerns?
The first order of business, if you have concern with any teacher, is you go to their direct supervisor. Well, I would ask that you go to the teacher first, but that's me. But then you go to the direct supervisor. And that direct supervisor, the system is the school board is at the top. The direct supervisor is supposed to deal with that teacher. If indeed that you believe that that teacher has not been dealt with, you climb the ladder to the superintendent or their director, and then you eventually will go to the school board. The role of the school board then is not to solve your problem, but to turn around to the superintendent and say, why am I still hearing this about X school, that there's these parents? What a school board is supposed to do is assess if yours a personal issue, a private issue, or a trend. And any school board worth their salt, if it's a private issue or a personal issue, will ask the principal to deal with it, a transfer of students, of class, whatever. If it tends to be a trend, then it's up to the superintendent to change the behavior of the principal, who's supposed to change the teacher behavior. That's the same way it's supposed to go.
Same question, but administrators, the principal.
Same thing. Administrators go, their direct supervisor is going to be an assistant superintendent or a superintendent. I just think it's really important, and I want you guys to know this. We have made some changes. I told you this last year. We're now funded 70% by individuals. We did this purposely. We wanted to retain an independent voice. We believe our credibility is when we call it as we see it. We have been offered grants if we support certain reforms. We won't do it. If we go under being independent. So that's where we're at. We have started and moved in a direction where we are as much individually funded as we possibly can be and only accept grants from civic engagement grantors. So just so that you know that's just a really important point for us. Never, ever, ever accept what anyone says, including me, unless you know where their funding comes from. Thank you, thank you.